They started to push blood into my system to keep me alive. And they did that by pushing a large gauge needle through my neck into my jugular. I needed 10 units of blood. And while they were prepping my neck and working on my neck, this big black pit opened up underneath me. Now, I should say I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. Certainly don't believe in heaven and hell. And I'm a rationalist. My father was a physicist and a rationalist and an atheist. And this big black void opened, this abyss opened up underneath me and slightly to my left. And I was getting pulled into it. And I had no idea I was dying. None, right? But I was 10 minutes from dead. I was terrified of going into this black abyss. Of course I would be. As I was like feeling this terrifying feeling of getting pulled in, and my dead father appeared above me and he communicated with me. And he was in this sort of like, it was like his essence, like this energy vision of him. It's hard to describe. And he communicated with me, it's okay. You don't have to fight it. You can come with me. I'll take care of you.
You are listening to The New Man, Beyond the Macho Jerk and the New Age Wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
What's going to happen to you after you die? Is death something you ignore or something you use to enjoy your days more? And are near-death experiences proof of an afterlife or just the brain going apeshit because it's losing oxygen? Sebastian Junger is no stranger to death. As a war correspondent, he survived an IED attack on his vehicle, and he spent a grueling stint in the treacherous Korengal Valley of Afghanistan. But in 2020, he came face to face with his own mortality in a very different setting, at home, with his family. And this brush with death shook him much, much deeper because of what and who he saw at the threshold into the unknown. In this discussion, Sebastian shares his amazing story and, most importantly, how his near-death experience has shaped the man he is today. Well, I'm going back to October 21. That was the last time we spoke. And we were talking about somehow making a sacrifice for how important sacrifice is. And then you went on some kind of tangential story about blood donations. And then you told a story about being in the emergency room, facing your death, this near-death experience. And then we just kind of wrapped up. And I remember we left that call and I was pissed off. I was like, why didn't you push him on that? And am I ever going to get a chance to talk about this again? And then now you've released this new book. And I couldn't be happier that we got a chance to come back, because that what you briefly shared that day impacted me greatly. And I was like, how could we just leave that hanging in the air like that? So I'm so glad.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Yeah, that was before I'd even started writing the book. And as like with every book I've ever written, I had real questions in my mind about how I was going to pull this off and whether there was a good book in the topic. And so now I've more or less answered my questions and fears about it, and the book is out, and I'm very psyched to talk about it.
It was riveting. But I just want to say, is there anything you want to get out of the way now instead of later, like a kind of an alien abduction or something like that?
Right. Yeah, right. No, that's the most extreme thing that's happened to me, and hopefully will remain so. So no, there's nothing, no bombshells at the end.
All right. Well, you've had a lot of extreme things happen to you, but let's go back to June 2020. Let's catch everybody else up. What happened?
Yeah, so my family and I were living in a remote property in Massachusetts at the end of a dead-end dirt road. No cell phone service, landlines that didn't work when it rained because they'd short out. In other words, paradise. And one afternoon, we had a couple of babysitters from a family that lived up the road a ways, and so my wife and I were able to go out to spend a couple hours on our together, which didn't happen very much. And we went out to this little cabin that's even deeper in the woods, and we were there spending some time. And in mid-sentence, I felt this pain shoot through my abdomen, and I was like, "Oh, that's strange. What is that?" And I stood up to try to walk it out. I thought it was some kind of indigestion, and I almost lost my feet. I almost fell over. And I sat back down on the bed and I said words I never thought I'd have to say. I said, "Honey, I think I'm going to need help. I don't know what's happening. I've never felt anything like this." And What I didn't know was that I had I was dying, and I didn't know it. It was that sudden. I'm an otherwise healthy man. I'm not a walking heart attack. I'm in really good shape. All my, like whatever, where those metrics are all good, right? But I had an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery in my abdomen. An aneurysm is a sort of unnatural ballooning in the blood vessel because of a weak spot or something like that. It's a random freak, rare thing, and they're asymptomatic. And when they rupture, there's a pretty good chance you're going to die. And the problem is, if you were stabbed in the stomach, the doctors, and were bleeding to death, the doctors would know where to put their finger to plug the leak, basically. But with internal hemorrhage, it could be anywhere. And they have a terrifically hard time figuring out where it is and getting to the wound, getting to the rupture. And it's deep in your body. And I was losing a pint of blood every 10 or 15 minutes. It took me an hour and a half to get to the hospital. And then, there's 10 pints of blood in the human body. I mean, I was literally a human hourglass.
Yeah.
Like once you've lost 2/3 of your blood, really no coming back from that. That's the amount that I lost. And so I finally got into an ambulance and they took off for the hospital. And, I was feeling a little better at that point. Your body goes into something called compensatory shock, which is sort of misleading. Like I regained my clarity of mind and I was no longer going in and out of consciousness and mumbling and going blind. Like I was like pretty normal except for the pain in my abdomen. And as soon as we got to the ER, I went off a cliff. The body can only stay in compensatory shock for so long. And that moment came for me right as we pulled in. I went off a cliff. The doctors knew immediately what was going on, not where the hemorrhage was, but massive abdominal hemorrhage. And they rushed me into the trauma bay and did some imaging on me. I was in end-stage hemorrhagic shock. I was convulsing with cold. They started to transfuse me, meaning they started to push blood into my system to keep me alive. And they did that by pushing a large gauge needle through my neck into my jugular and to transfuse directly into my jugular. I needed 10 units of blood, right? A full body's, basically at the end of the day, like a full body's worth of blood. Initially, I got 3 units and then I kept needing more. And while they were prepping my neck and working on my neck, this big black pit opened up underneath me. Now, I should say I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I certainly don't believe in heaven and hell. And I'm a rationalist. My father was a physicist and a rationalist and an atheist. And this big black void this abyss opened up underneath me and slightly to my left. And I was getting pulled into it. And I had no idea I was dying. None, right? But I was 10 minutes from dead. And I was terrified of going into this black abyss. Of course I would be, right? I was like a wounded animal. I just wanted nothing to do with it. As I was like feeling this terrifying feeling of getting pulled in, I have a wife, 2 little girls. I have a lot to live for. And I know that if I go into the pit, I'm not coming back, right? Like I sort of sense that. And my dead father appeared above me and he communicated with me and he was in this sort of like, it was like his essence, like this energy vision of him. It's hard to describe. And he communicated with me, it's okay. You don't have to fight it. You can come with me. I'll take care of you. And I was like, go with you. You're dead. Like I'm alive. I'm not going with you. Like the idea was grotesque. Like we have nothing in common. You're dead. Like we have nothing in common. What are you doing here? Like I was really horrified. And I said to the doctor, you got to hurry. You're losing me right now. I'm going. And eventually they saved my life against all odds. And I've since learned how tiny their odds of survival were.
I've followed your work for years. Death is a common attribute to the things that you talk about. Being in combat, you were in a vehicle that ran over an IED, if I remember correctly, and you were almost blown up and killed in that. Something about this experience seemed to hit much, much harder. Is it because you're a family man at this stage of your life, or what was it about this coming so close to death this time that seemed to impact you so much? You talk about that at great length in the book. Yeah.
Well, for war reporters, and maybe for soldiers as well, going to a war is like, you're like, all right, I'm going to sit down at this poker table. And I've got these chips. I'm gonna wager them that I can win a few hands. And in professional terms, for a journalist, that would mean sort of advance up the ladder, professional ladder, and come back with sort of credibility and credentials and experiences that I just can't get stateside, right? So that's what you're winning in the pot if you win a hand of poker at that particular kind of table, journalistic table, right? So I'm going to play a few hands of poker and I'm going to get out before I lose all my chips, right? I'm going to hopefully win a few hands, and then I'm going to leave, right? And that's what happened after my friend Tim Hetherington was killed. I made the documentary Restrepo with Tim, and he was my colleague and friend and brother, really, sort of comrade in arms, as it were, from a year off and on that we spent in a small American outpost in eastern Afghanistan. And when he was killed in Libya, on an assignment I was supposed to be on with him, he took a mortar fragment into his groin and it severed his femoral artery, and he bled out just like I almost bled out. He bled out, except he was in the back of a rebel pickup truck, and he didn't get to the hospital in time, and they couldn't save his life. So I got out of war reporting after that because I didn't want to devastate everyone who loved me like I was watching Tim devastate everyone who loved him, including myself, right? And
did you you woke up to something like this? Wait, this isn't just about me at the poker table. This is about something bigger than me, or
yeah,
what shifted?
I watched the consequences in Tim's life. I'm like, I can't do that. Maybe had I been 25, I would have been like, you know what, this is what I'm doing. I'll try to be careful, but
yeah,
I was when Tim died, I was almost 50, and I was like, I can't. But I didn't have a family.
Okay.
But I was almost 50, and I just thought I can't. My parents were still alive, and so I stopped war reporting, and I was married. In great part because of my wife at the time, who I'm still. We divorced. I'm still good friends with her, but she said to me, like, we got the news about Tim on the landline, the phone in the apartment, right? On the landline. And she said, even if nothing happens to you, every time you're gone, whenever the phone rings, I'm going to think it's the phone call we just got about Tim. And every time I pick up the phone, I'm going to have to brace myself for the worst possible news. You can't do that to me. And she was absolutely right. And so I got out of war reporting, and there was a lot of consequences for me in the next year or so. But among other things, the marriage ended. And then I remarried and had this beautiful family. I have these two little girls who are now 7 and 4. And when I almost died, they were 3 and 6 months. And they just meant everything to me. I thought I could walk away from the danger and then I'm good. I'm a healthy man, right? I don't smoke a pack a day. I'm not a walking heart attack. I'm good, right? I'm a healthy, athletic man. Of course we can all get cancer and what have you, but I'm not going to be dead by dinner time. So I'm not going to wake up some morning and not make it till dinner. That's not what's going to happen, right? That's exactly what can happen. And I didn't anticipate that the front, as it were, the front lines can come to you. And so it was this sort of violation. I was in a safe place. It was my home, right? And the sort of violation of the safety of the imagined safety of that world was what was so troubling. If you're worried about getting killed in a war zone, don't go to war zones, and then your troubles are over, right? I said to someone, it's like I owed the mafia money. It's like, sorry, there's nowhere you can go where you won't have to pay this back, right? I mean, that's sort of what mortality is. It's like, we will, you borrowed 60 years from us. We're going to come collect one day, and there's nowhere you can go where we can't find you. And that's what it felt like. And it was an absolutely devastating feeling. It was way more traumatic than anything that ever happened in the battlefield. It took way longer for me to recover from.
Interesting. And this happens every day in emergency rooms all around the world, right? I'm curious because, people have these experiences, and sometimes they have an awakening. They have some kind of new realization. They feel liberated. For you, at least in that period, shortly after, as you were writing the book, it seemed to be a burden. It seemed like you were carrying something. You even said that you would be the pet of death. If death had a pet, that you would be kind of going along with that. What was going on for you? Was it just this shift in worldview that you were vulnerable and maybe you didn't think you were?
Yeah, it was a number of things. I mean, first of all, I wasn't convinced that there wasn't some other aneurysm lurking in there because this had happened out of the blue,
Right.
and that it could that could blow too, and so that this could happen all over again. So I didn't, I really for a while I didn't dare be too far from a hospital. I wouldn't take an airplane flight. I mean, all the things that had I been doing them, I would have died. I wouldn't go camping in the woods, right? I mean, I love the wilderness. I love like I wouldn't go near it because I just thought I'm not going on a 6 hour hike with my family and 3 hours in. I rupture another artery and they got to sit around while their husband and father dies in front of them. Like I'm not doing that.
Right.
So it took a long time to believe that my vasculature was actually safe and okay. Right. And, it's not like a heart attack or a stroke where it's a function of a poor level of health. It's a completely random thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if I'd had a heart attack, the doctor's like, we're putting you on statins. You got to lose 30 pounds. I want you walking 3 miles every day. And a year from now, I can say, if you do all these things, you will be safe from a heart attack, right? It wasn't like that. It was completely random, right? So I couldn't make myself feel safe from it. And the other problem was that, at 36 hours prior, I had this terrible dream. Now, I had no idea that I had a health issue that was preparing to kill me, right? I had no idea. I had this terrible dream that I was hovering above my family and they were crying and I was trying to get their attention. I was waving and calling to them and they couldn't hear me. They couldn't see me. And I was made to understand that I died and that there was no going back. Like, sorry, man, you're outbound right now. It's over. And I was a spirit. I was absolutely devastated. I was so anguished in my dream that I woke up. And I woke up, we sleep together as a family on a big mattress on the floor and pad on the floor. And I woke up next to my older daughter who was 3 at the time. And I clutched her like she was a stuffy, right? I mean, I was just like, oh my God, thank God that was just a dream because it felt real. It felt like I died. Thank God, right? Chilling dream. So then after I almost died, I came back from the hospital. I started researching NDEs, near-death experiences, and the dream that I had. I mean, first of all, in NDEs, people often see the dead. The dead come to escort them across the threshold, right? I mean, it's a very, very common thing in many different cultures, through the ages. Like that's just a very common experience. But one of the others is sort of hovering above your family, unable to communicate with them as you get sort of like taken off into wherever we go. And so I had this fear that maybe I had actually died in my sleep. And the dream that I'd had was my actual experience of dying. And that everything else, including waking up in the bed and including the rupture and the ride to the hospital and then coming back from the ICU, that all of it was a hallucination, was a dying like hallucination. And that I had actually died, or in some other dimension, I did die, whatever that even means, right? But I was just seized with this terror. And so not only was I anxious about it literally happening again in this world, in this life, but I was worried that there was somehow that I had died and I was imagining that I was in this life. I know it sounds sort of like abstract and a little silly and sort of a what if kind of like thought experiment, but I was so traumatized and so anxious that it felt entirely real. And it's a very worrying that you actually died is actually a very, very common psychological consequence of almost dying, and worrying that you did die. And so I'm sort of in good company. I didn't know that at the time, but those are the two things I really struggled with.
Yeah. Yeah. It just that sense of like, what is real? What can I latch onto? I'm looking for certainty. I'm looking for stability. I'm looking for something that I can really lean into. And I don't have that right now. Right. You mentioned seeing your father, and your father was a strange candidate for this appearance for a lot of reasons, but, being a scientist, being a rationalist, being somebody who's an atheist, not somebody who you would expect. It sounds like your mother would probably be more of the person that you might see in this kind of realm. Right. There's that tension throughout the book of your father's rationalism that, if it's not observable, maybe it's not there. We can't, if we can't explain it, then it doesn't exist. And then the effort you're going through to try to make sense of what happened. what is this, and trying to make sense. And is it still going on for you? Or are you finding some peace that there's room for the unexplainable?
Well, I'm a journalist. And so when I wrote this book, which is, I guess, technically a memoir, I mean, it doesn't cover the span of my life, but it's, I'm writing about myself extensively and mostly about what happened to me. But that doesn't relieve one from the duties of the obligations and the standards of journalism. And so I also reported the whole story as if I were someone else, right? So I interviewed all the doctors who would talk to me. I interviewed my wife. I kept notebooks in the sense I was interviewing myself. I mean, I kept notebooks in the days following this to keep track of what I was thinking, what my reactions were, what was going on in my mind as I grappled with this. So I did a proper journalistic treatment of the topic as well. And the book is a blend of those two things. And one of the things I did, of course, was research NDEs, near-death experiences. And, there's extensive literature on it, and there's thousands and thousands of cases who had experiences, similar or almost identical to mine. And some very smart, well-credentialed people feel, doctors and, what have you, feel that the stories of NDEs from around the world, the thousands of them, amount to sort of evidence of an afterlife, that there's things that can't be explained in these stories, and they can't be explained through sort of conventional scientific means, and that there's some kind of afterlife that we don't understand. And then, of course, there's the party poopers, the naysayers, the haters, who are like, no, I'm a neurologist, and people hallucinate all the time, and the dying brain is under extreme stress, and we know that it releases gamma waves when as it's dying, and that the sites of the brain that light up when someone dies have to do with memory, and so it all makes sense. So the rationalists sort of waded in and said, nice try, but we can explain all this through very basic medicine and chemistry. So I even though I'm an atheist, I sort of got my hopes up a little bit when I was reading the NDE stuff. I was like, whoa, maybe there's nothing to be scared of. Like, wow, this is pretty convincing. Like, how do you explain that, right?
Yeah.
And then people like my dad waded in and were like, no, this is easy, right? Like, this is neurochemistry. And I sort of went with that, right? I mean, because I'm of that sort of mind, except for one thing. And there was one thing that really didn't quite make sense, that never has been adequately explained, in my view, which is, it seems that only the dying see the dead, right? And that's true in hospice. Around the world, hospice nurses will tell you that as people die in their last days, even, they'll be very clearly interacting with someone they see in the room that no one else can see. An uncle, a parent, a dead child, whatever it may be. And it's extremely common. And then it's extremely common when people have proper NDEs where their heart stops or whatever. And then if they're brought back to life, they recall encountering this dead relative, this dead loved one who's like, it's okay, you can come with me, or I'm here to tell you to turn back. It's not your time. And it's very, very common, right? And sometimes the people that show up were actually not known to have died by the person who's dying because they were killed in a car accident the day before. I mean, mysterious things like that, right? And so my book is divided into two sections, what and if. What is what happened to me? If is, what if there were some kind of post-death existence? I prefer that to the word afterlife. What if there was some kind of post-death existence that exists in the physical realm? Like, this isn't some mystical thing. This, like, it actually is a matter that could be understood by science, just isn't yet. How would that possibly work? Like, in physical terms, how would that possibly work? And of course, the path, that thought experiment, leads pretty quickly to quantum physics and some of the deep mysteries of the quantum world. And as I say in the book, if there is some kind of post-death existence for the individual, it's probably at the quantum level, and probably as mysterious and hard to understand, impossible to understand, beyond our ken, right? Beyond our knowing. It's some of the most profound contradictions and mysteries of quantum science. I don't prove or conclude anything, of course, because I'm a journalist and I can't. But I have the conversation about how theoretically, how could this possibly work in a knowable world of subatomic physics?
Yeah, it's very thorough, and I like that you leave room for it there. Like, it could live in this neighborhood over here. There's a possibility there. I was fascinated because I'm not very familiar with near-death experiences, haven't read about them. Things like life review, the flashing before our eyes happens, and you propose an evolutionary reason why that might be there. But one thing that also stood out that you've also named here, which is choosing to go back. There's a choice. That was a thing. That was a thread that they meet the loved ones there, and then they make a choice. No, I'm going to go back and live. I thought that was fascinating too. Can you just, what do you think's going on there that's not like, oh, I was brought back. I chose to come back.
Right. I mean, many of these accounts, and the reason they've been sort of co-opted by a kind of Christian voice that propose that these experiences point to not just a quote afterlife, but to heaven, right? That there's a heaven, because some of these experiences are extremely expansive and blissful, akin to the kind of psychedelic trips that people have had on mushrooms and with ayahuasca and LSD and all kinds of other transformative drugs. And that the dying person recounts having this, being irresistibly drawn towards this place of light and lightness and complete total wisdom and knowledge and all these transcending feelings that people have had on drugs as well. And that amounts to heaven, and that in the analysis of a few Christians who have volunteered their opinion with me, the black abyss, of course, that I experienced underneath me is the pits of hell. And that, Sebastian, and I've had people say this to me, if you don't come to God, if you don't find Jesus, that's where you're going. And your dead father showed up to show you the way to Christ. Follow him, right? Like, or you're going to go to hell, which we can talk about why I think that it's all nonsense if you like, but suffice it to say, I don't give much credence to that. But the experiences of many people with NDEs is often a kind of ecstatic one. But the dead person, the dead loved one is like, stop, no, turn back. You have a family. It's not your time. You don't have to die. You must turn back from this moment of bliss back into your pain-racked body that's been cut wide open by the surgeon, who's desperately trying to like fix your shredded aorta. Like, go back into that body. It's your duty. And that I will see you in 20 or 30 years. Right. And that's a very, very common experience. And again, like, is there some evolutionary programming in there? Darwin would have us survive at all possible costs, right? And Darwinism, evolution selects for the individuals that are the best at survival and procreation, right? And so maybe that's what's going on there. I'm not quite convinced by the Darwinian argument either, but there's something to be said for the conversation.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the nurse. There's a nurse that shows up the day after.
Yeah. So I wake up in the ICU, enormously confused. There's tubes all over the place. I'm incredibly weak, and machines are beeping and bleeping, and you know what an ICU sounds like. We've seen them in a million movies. And this nurse shows up, and she says, "Good morning, Mr. Junger. You're awake. Congratulations, you survived. You almost didn't make it. You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you made it. It's sort of a miracle." And I was utterly shocked. I had no idea that I almost died. None, right? And the only thought I had in that sort of twilight zone that I was in the night before was, I got a lot of pain in my stomach, and these people seemed awfully concerned, and maybe I've got some terrible tumor and that ruptured, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning, they'll operate, but I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning with the news that I've got like 3 months to live. Like I was sort of, even in my twilight zone, I was sort of aware that there was that possibility, right? No idea that my life was on the block right at that moment, right?
Yeah.
So I wake up in the ICU and she tells me that, and then she walks away. And she was a middle-aged lady with a Boston accent, sort of heart of gold, tough as nails, that kind of lady. She seemed like she'd buried 3 husbands, like that kind of woman, right? And she came back an hour later and said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Not that well, frankly. Like, I'm terrified by what you told me. I can't stop thinking about it. I had no idea that I almost died. I have 2 little girls and a wife." And I'm like, "What?" And she said, try this. Try thinking, instead of thinking about it like something scary, try thinking about it like something sacred. And then she walked out. Even though I'm an atheist, I claim access to that word, right? I mean, the word sacred can have some perfectly fine secular meanings that I'm happy to use. And so for me, the word sacred means, I mean, this is just the meaning that I've given it for my own purposes in my own life. Sacred is anything that allows people to live with more dignity, more courage, less fear, more love. That's sacred. In my mind, I thought been going to front lines my whole life. I went to the ultimate front line, which is my own mortality, my own death. I was allowed to look over the edge, peer into the abyss, allowed to come back. Did I come back with any sacred knowledge? Like, what did I come back with that could help people live more dignified, less fearful, more loving lives? Like, what did I learn at the edge of the abyss? And so, eventually I got out of the hospital after about a week. And as I started to sort of make inquiries into if I could write a book about this, I reached out to the doctors and experts, et cetera, et cetera. I thought, I want to talk to that nurse. Like, I made good use of what she said, but what did she mean by it? And I tried to find her. And I called the hospital. I called the public affairs office. I called the ICU. I described her. No one knew who I was talking about. Like, no one here by that description. Sorry, sir. Like, and there are some non-woo-woo explanations, right? It could be she just didn't want to talk to a freaking journalist. Like, they're all press averse, and maybe she was just like, tell that guy to go away. Like, and or as one person suggested, I have to assume they're Christian. That woman was my guardian angel, and she had come down, and she didn't exist. And she didn't exist for other people, but she was there to help me. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know. Like, I don't know. I'm not at all convinced that there was something weird going on. But at the end of all this, I have to say, I'm not sure of anything, right? Like, I mean, was it my dad? Like, and I really have to be, it's not a word I'm crazy about, but sort of agnostic about it. Like, if there was proof of God, I would believe in God, right? And right now, I'm not sure what there's proof of, because all of these things, I don't know how to explain them. And so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that was a fascinating story. Yeah, I think this just keeps coming back to, it has me think of Ernest Becker's book, Denial of Death, and kind of what all the mental gymnastics we go through to kind of push this away. And let's think about the Kardashians, so we don't have to really face that we're going to die one day and everybody else are going to die. And just coming back to like how much we don't know and how out of control that we are. It's daunting if we really stare into that and get a look at that. It's terrifying to be in that place. And I appreciate that we can leave room for it instead of like, okay, I'm going to plant my flag firmly in this certainty of something, because I think that's just another coping mechanism there. I mean, is that what happened? Like your shell of certainty, this is how the world works. It's a poker game, and now I do this, and now I'm fine. I'm exonerated from. Is that what you lost as a result of this? And now you sit more. I'm wondering if you're just sitting more comfortably with this uncertainty and this unknowing. That's the story that I got.
Well, the experience terrified me. And the flip side of terror is reverence for me, right? Like, wow, we could die any day. Terrifying. Oh, but then what's that make today feel like? It makes today feel like I'm so lucky that at least I have today. I don't know that I'll have tomorrow, but I know I have right now. And right now I'm at the playground with my daughters, who I love more than I knew love was even possible like this, right? Like, so what are you going to do right now with this bounty? Are you going to scroll through your Instagram account? I don't have one, but as it were, am I going to watch my daughter play and interact with her and just soak up this treasure that is life, right? An unlikely treasure, right? I mean, the odds of the universe existing, let me see if I can get the numbers right. The odds of the universe existing are 10 to the negative 230. So that's one chance in a number that has 230 zeros after it, right? Virtually impossible, and yet here we are. So are you really going to go scroll through? Instagram? Is that what you're using this universe for? And I should say, I'm an atheist and I have a flip phone, right? So I actually, when I say scroll through Instagram, it's just things I see other people do. And I don't do that because I can't, and I can't on purpose. And so it gave me a kind of reverence for today, for now. We're social primates, we're mammals, we evolved in a dangerous world that required our full attention. Dangerous animals who will attack us, and other animals we had to kill to eat to survive, and shelters we had to build, and young women giving birth, and et cetera, et cetera. Like that was our reality, like it is for all mammals. And if you're too distracted by the fact that when the clock stops ticking, you're dead forever and none of this means anything. If you're too preoccupied with that, you're not going to function very well in the things you need to do to keep yourself alive and keep your children alive. So there is a built-in level of denial that is completely adaptive and necessary and healthy and ordinary. And we experience that all the time. You know, we all know that car accidents kill people every day. When we get in the car, we deliberately don't think about that because, you know, frankly, I have to go to work this morning, which is a death trap for some people, and drive it to work. So I'm not going to be thinking about the fact that it's arguably a dangerous thing to do. So we need that kind of denial in order to function. And function we must. That's what life is, right? But what I would beg people to do is to not distract yourself from life. When there's things we need to do them with your full concentration, and then carve out some time to be just amazed that we get to do any of this, and that your daughter is like on the monkey bars right now, and just like plug in, man, like just dig it. Like this is incredible. But please don't avoid thinking about life and death and consciousness and the universe and all that stuff. Don't avoid those uncomfortable thoughts by losing yourself in inconsequential things like social media, like Instagram. Like just don't do that. That's the real, I mean, I'm not religious, but that's for me is what my religion would be is like, do not waste your time.
Is there a way that we can prepare for death? You seem to be leaning in that direction, but then there's also just a reverence for death, an appreciation for death, an acceptance that it's inevitable. And then, you know, it seems like by and large, we all just run away from it. Even with your father saying, come on, it's like, hell no, I'm not coming. But I was kind of thinking like, yeah, what does it look like to prepare and accept, but not be giving up, not resigned to life? There's a beautiful sweet spot in there.
You know, even before you die, someday, hopefully you'll be old and you'll think, wow, I wish it was 30 years ago and my knees worked and I was running around that playground with my 6-year-old. And I didn't realize at that moment, I kept thinking, wow, I wish I could get home because I got some shit to do, right? And now here I am, I'm 85 years old. What I wouldn't give to have 5 minutes, right, as a younger person running around with that beautiful little girl, like the treasure of my life. Like, what was I thinking at that moment that I was like wanted to be somewhere else, right? What I wouldn't give to be back there right now. Instead, I'm in an old folks home and, you know, et cetera, right? So don't think about, I mean, I wouldn't recommend thinking about death in a way, right? But what I would think about loss. I would think about, we already lost yesterday, right? Like that's already beyond our reach. Forget about 30 years ago, you know, for that matter, a minute ago is beyond our reach. It's fleeing, right? So like, why the only thing you have is the experience you're having right now. So really have it, like really have the experience, right? And, you know, and it doesn't mean sitting in the lotus position in the woods all day long, right? It means doing stuff, but be like conscious you're doing it and don't wish you were doing something else because you're doing this, right? And that's all you're ever going to get to do is this, right? And so just like stop with the complaints and stop with the distractions.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where I see people on their smartphones. I mean, I see parents in the playground, just like they might as well not have a kid because they're just like eyeball deep in some algorithm. They've been completely captured by some algorithm. I mean, these companies, these tech companies that develop it's evil. You want to get a teenage girl's attention? Like, give her the technology to take a selfie and put it on the internet, put it on Instagram. And when she's waiting for the likes to come pouring in because she wants her friends to think that it's a nice photo and she's pretty and whatever else, like, withhold the likes, which is what Instagram does. Withhold the likes until the poor girl has gone an hour thinking that no one likes her or cares about her, and then give her all the likes all at once and give her a little dopamine rush. And you want to keep a 15-year-old girl checking her phone every 12 seconds. That's how you do it. And that's how they did it. Right. Yeah. So tell me that's not evil. Right. So, like, what I would say when I see people do this, I'm like, they have seized your attention. And when they take your attention, it means they've taken your life. Attention and life are the same thing. They're interchangeable. And when something takes your attention, they are making claim on your life, and they are monetizing that claim on they're turning your life into their money. And it's like, are you kidding? We're all going along with this. Like, what have we done to ourselves? Right. Yeah. So I'll stop ranting about that now, but I'm guilty of distractions also, it's a human thing, but just at least be cognizant of it.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're pointing to is that sometimes we can think life is the extraordinary stuff. Life is the thing I'm going to do one day. I'm going to get around to it. And the mundane, like you said, just this mundane moment, I would be priceless if I could come back to it. And I don't know where I heard this, but it was a mental exercise of, like, imagine you're on your deathbed or you're far out in the future and there's a time machine. You don't get to choose when you go back. It just plops you into a moment. And it might be the moment when you're doing the dishwasher and your back doesn't hurt. And there's your young daughter and you're just like, oh, holy shit. I can feel this. I can taste it. I can smell it. And I can hear her voice and just look at it. And I play that little trick with myself often, especially when I'm just like, ugh, shit, I don't want to do the dishes. I don't want to to get into that normal kind of mundane place. But sometimes it can kind of snap me out of that and just like, yeah, what does it feel like? And I'll grab her hand and really feel it. Just like, she's here. She's right here, right now. And, so it's finding those little tricks to come back to this moment and not wait for the big extraordinary thing to come along.
Right. And it's hard to get there without really understanding what the stakes are. And the stakes are terrifying. So if you want to really live your life, you've got to acknowledge something that's quite terrifying, which is that you're going to die and death is permanent as far as we know. But what you get back for that payment, in a word, that psychological payment that you make on death, is that you really, you acquire a new tool for really living your life fully. And then you realize, the first times I went to wars, I had the feeling that real life was happening in a war zone, and life back home in the comfortable safe United States wasn't really real. Now I realize how silly that was. Of course, it's completely real. Yeah. Right. And you can lead lives that aren't that meaningful. I would argue that a round of golf is maybe pleasurable for some people, but it doesn't have a lot of meaning. By meaning, I mean consequences, right? The consequences are almost zero. Right. But meaning comes from consequence. And there are huge consequences in war, which is why it feels more meaningful, which is why it feels more real. But at the end of the day, sitting on a park bench with your daughter is, tell me this is anything more meaningful than that. Certainly not getting mortared. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah. One thing I'm curious what your take is on humor here, because I grew up in a house. My dad was a homicide and narcotics cop. He was a Marine before that. Humor was how those guys dealt with it. And I'm sure, and I know people that are emergency, first responders, humor is the thing that helps them get through things. I imagine you sitting in foxholes, you guys, there was a lot of joking around to help with that. And I'm curious did humor help you through any of this? Did it play a role beyond just deflection? I think it helps us not take shit too seriously. But what's your take on humor and its role here?
I've been around a lot of all male groups. The soldiers I was with, it was all men. It was combat infantry, and which by definition is all male and young male, right? And I've been on construction crews, which with the occasional exception of a woman, but they're generally male. On and on through the various dangerous industries, the ones that get people killed all the time: logging, commercial fishing, commercial diving. So one thing that men are quite good at is collecting in a group to do something, to do a dedicated task, often that's very unpleasant and very dangerous. Every society in the world uses men in general to do those things. Not that women never do it, but on the whole, on average, it's male groups that do that stuff. A roofing crew in Tucson, Arizona, in 110-degree temperature, working class males, right? Almost invariably, right? One of the ways that men function in groups that I haven't, I mean, I'm happy to be corrected, but I don't think it works this way. One of the ways that men function in groups in order to deflect the miserableness of being on a roofing crew in Tucson in 110-degree temperatures is they use a lot of humor, and they use a lot of insulting humor. They insult each other, right? I mean, young men, they love taking the piss out of each other. I mean, all kinds of just like inconceivable ways that are inconceivable, I think, for a lot of women. So guys do that a lot, and it's a way of affirming their bonds. It's basically like, if anyone else said that to me, I'd punch them. But because we're brothers, because we're on this crew together, we're tribe, you're gonna say that, and I'm gonna bend over laughing hysterically. And then I'm gonna tell you what it's like to bang your mom, right? And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It's like, it's how the males communicate to each other. Listen, man, we're in this together, and you could say the most insulting thing to me, and I'm just gonna laugh. And if some other guy did that, he'd be dead, right? And so that's how I know that we're in the same group, because we have that humor. That's what men are very, very good at. So the soldiers that I was with, not only are they an all-male group in a miserable situation, they're also in combat. So that's then times 1,000, right? I think for me, I tried to do that a little bit with this. But of course, now I'm not in a platoon anymore. I'm in my family. And I'm sharing a foxhole with my wife and children. And the sort of norms of humor that I'm used to with other men aren't the same. Like, gentlemen, don't try this trick at home, sort of thing, right? Like, so.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story when my father and another cop friend, they were in the Bahamas and they were spearfishing with the other guy's family was there. Long story short, a bull shark attacked the friend, took a big chunk out of the leg. They get him out of the water. They've got a good 30-minute boat ride to get him back. They both know what they're up against. The two adults in the room know that could be really, really bad. And it's not like you're going to a Florida hospital, you're going to a Bahamian thing.
Right.
So my dad is trying to help calm things down, and he's like, Jay, come on, man, you get my boat really bloody. Could you cut it out? And there's like this ha-ha kind of thing. And then another joke, which was, afterwards I saw the shark go lick his ass to try to get the taste out of his mouth. Ha-ha, like trying this kind of stuff. But afterwards, the daughter came up and just was, laid into my dad. How could you be that way?
Yeah.
And he goes, I was trying to keep your dad alive. I knew if I could keep him, kind of staying positive and not spiraling into that place where it could get really bad really quick. And that was, just two different ways of dealing with it,
It's that thing, and it's a way of keeping the group together and making everyone feel included, right? I mean, if I was in an all-male group and no one insulted me, I'd be like, damn, they don't like me. They don't like me very much, do they?
Right. Yeah, that's how you know you're in. As soon as that first shot comes,
that's
and
you
fire one back, and then brothers, just right there. We're good.
You get insulted, and you get a somewhat mocking nickname, right? I mean, and you're like, oh, the love. I'm feeling the love, right?
Yeah.
And it's a very male thing. And it happens in all kinds of circumstances, and clearly is adaptive, clearly helps groups of young men navigate things that will get them killed, or at the very least, really don't feel very good. Yeah, I firemen, I live in New York City, and New York City firemen, and I'm sure all over the country, all over the world, are great. I mean, this is their sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
And their sort of gallows humor about their own job is totally extraordinary. And I was in a firehouse at one point, and one of them had almost been killed. They'd been busting into a fire. They were sort of at the front entry, about to go in, this raging fire, and a piece of cornice, like a big cornice, like chunk of cement or granite or whatever, fell off the top of this like 4-story building and fell and hit one of the guys in the shoulder, like 4 stories down. This chunk of rock just nailed him. and almost killed him. And he was in the hospital for months, right? And he finally got back, and they didn't know if he was ever going to fight fire again. And he finally got him back to the firehouse, to his locker that he hadn't seen since before the accident. And he looked up, and above his locker, the fireman had attached the piece of cornice, and bolted it to the wall, right? Oh my God! Like, that's the boys. That's the way they roll. And of course, the guy just like burst out laughing. Of course, like that's, oh, you do love me, right? You do love me after all. It's a totally extraordinary thing.
Yeah, it's a way. I think there's something in it that it can be terrifying and the most reverence, that we can have in our life. And also, if you can't find the cosmic joke in it, like if you can't find the humor in it, there's something that's very difficult to hold both of those things. And
also, young men, I mean, men can really damage each other. I mean, if they get into a physical fight, they can really hurt each other or kill each other, which is, of course, is maladaptive in a, small scale tribal society where every hand is needed, right? And so, because men have this, they're just so much, on average, so much stronger than women. So you don't want men in a group coming to blows with each other. And so humor is a way of getting rid of the tension, deflecting things. As one guy in the platoon said, boy, there's guys one soldier said to me, there's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we would all die for each other. And one of the ways you make that happen is with this humor and this mockery. And if someone gets sort of butthurt because someone made a joke about him, you're out, man. Like, I don't trust you. Exactly. And if you have actual feelings, like you don't belong here. Yeah. And no, it really is a sort of an adaptive thing. And I know a woman, an anthropologist, who did this extraordinary study. She was convinced that men are more affectionate with each other than women are. And of course, we were like, oh, that's nonsense. Women hold hands, all this stuff. She said, no. In situations of conflict, how do the sexes act? In which he found that in things like boxing matches and other sports competitions, the victor and the defeated opponent are way, way more likely to hug if they're male than if they're female. Right. The women are more likely to just walk away from each other. But basically with the men, they're like, all right, we just had a mortal contest. I won, you lost. Let's signal it to each other. We're going back. We're back to being allies now. And because women don't often function in single-sex groups that are tasked with defending the society, they don't need to repair that fracture, right? That's not an important part of the process. So the numbers are in. Like, men do that way, way more than women do, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It reminds me of the times growing up, getting into a scrap with somebody. Usually there's a few tears at the end, and then you best buds. Like, there was something got worked out in that skirmish, and it was like whatever we had to work out, we worked out, and now there can be a real strong bond in those. Sometimes
I knew a guy who was the son of a bar owner, an Irish bar in Central Square in Boston, Cambridge, and long gone, but it was a really tough Irish bar. And the rule was that if the fighting was allowed, right? No problem. You guys want to get into a fight? Get into a fight. But afterwards, the guy who won has to buy the guy who lost a drink. And you have to drink that drink together. Of course, you buy 2 drinks, one for each man. But it's on the guy who won to buy the drinks, and then you sit there and you have your drinks together, and then that nonsense is over with. It's just it's the same sort of mechanism. Keep the group together. Right.
That's beautiful. Well, let's talk about somebody who didn't probably have a very fun day. I want to wrap up with this story, if you're open to telling it, about the Polish Jesuit Kazimierz Lazinski. And I don't know why I was laughing out loud at this, but I shouldn't be laughing out loud. But maybe true. What was it? Tragedy plus time equals comedy.
Right. So yes, poor Lazinski, as I've come to think of him. So Lazinski was a lapsed Jesuit priest in the early 1600s who wrote a sort of a tract that he kept at home, and he went into a lot of theological stuff. I mean, a very, very developed argument that God did not create man, but it was the other way around, that man created God. and man created God in their image, in man's image, right? And of course, I mean man in the sort of like old sense of humans.
Right.
And Lisinski, being a generous sort, loaned a neighbor of his some money. And when the payment came due, the guy didn't want to pay it. So he snuck into Lisinski's house, stole the manuscript, handed it over to the church, who promptly arrested Lisinski, charged him with blasphemy and heresy, and found him guilty and condemned him not just to death. And yet keep in mind, this is a church body, right? These are religious people. These are people who have found Jesus, who have made Jesus' love the center point of their life, et cetera, et cetera. Forgive your fellow man, et cetera, et cetera. We all know, right? They condemned him not just to death, but to have his tongue torn out with a red-hot iron, red-hot tongs, for having spoken against God, to have his hands burned off while he's still alive for having written against God, and then to be burned alive and then have his ashes shot out of a cannon. That last touch is the part
that was artful there. I mean, that was
right? Right. So these are the church fathers coming up with this, right? And, you know, people ask me, why are you not religious? Like, all right, have you heard about poor Lisinski? That's why, right? You all have some apologizing to do. There's a couple of things you got to make right, and Lisinski's one of them. And so then someone intervened and did him the great favor of saying, you know what, you're just going to be beheaded. We're going to take it easy on you. We'll just behead you, which is what happened.
Yeah.
Right. But basically, I bring him in because not to just attack religion, which it's not something I do in my spare time. And I know a lot of religious people who I love and adore, and religion can be a very good thing in many people's lives. The history of religion is not for the faint of heart. But I bring that story in because there's a direct parallel in the world of quantum physics, where the observer, it can be proven that the observer creates the reality that they're observing rather than the other way around. And it's the central mystery of the subatomic world and possibly of all existence. And so I sort of like Lisinski in his own way was ahead of his time. And the physicists eventually came to sort of their quantum version of what he declared to be true. And, you know, basically what he said is, Lisinski said, is quite brilliant. He said, when you ask God to be something that's impossible, which is self-creating, when you ask God to be something that's impossible, you sort of make a laughingstock of yourself, and you deny the world the benefits of reason, of rational thought. And that's what his problem was with religion, that you're stripping the world of the benefits of reason, and you're making a mockery of God because you're asking him to be something that nothing can be, which is self-creating.
Great stuff. Sebastian, thanks for this piece. It's really powerful. I'm so grateful you're back, you're here, first and foremost, but number two, that you wrote this book and shared this experience, because it left an impact on me, just what you shared last time. So that you followed it up is fantastic, man. Thanks for your work.
All right. Thank you, man. Nice to talk to you.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.